Buenas tardes, yo soy Michael
Good
Erde,
afternoon,
soy
I'm
director
Michael Yahya. I'm
de
the
la
director
Fundación
of the
Friedrich
Foundation
en España.
Friedrich Ebert
Quisiera
here
saludar
in
en
Spain, and I
nombre
would
de la
like to say
Fundación
hello in the name
Friedrich.
of the foundation.
Gracias por venir y
Thank
gracias
you
por
for
los
being
interés en el
here.
tema
Thank you for your
de nuestra discusión.
interest in the
Quisiera también
subject
agradecer
matter.
a la Casa
Also,
Árabe,
I'd like to thank
nuestro
Casa
partner,
Árabe, our
no solo
partner,
la conferencia sobre
not
Irak
just
hace
in
un
the
año, sino
conference
también
about
en la
Iraq a
producción
year
del
ago,
libro.
but also in the
Y
progression of
quería
the book. And I
agradecer a
would like to
eh,
thank
nuestros huéspedes del extranjero que
our
va a
guest from
introducir
abroad,
Karim.
who Karim
Eh,
will now
bueno, hoy
introduce.
presentamos un
We
libro sobre
present a
Irak que
book today, a
surge de una
book about
conferencia
Iraq, which comes from
hace
a
un año.
conference a
Sin
year
embargo,
ago.
y desgraciadamente,
Nevertheless, and
el libro es
unfortunately,
de gran
the
actualidad,
book is very up to
mayor que en la
date,
fecha de la conferencia en el
even more than
2014,
at the
desgraciadamente.
conference in
De hecho, el
2014.
libro no es un
Unfortunately,
libro solo sobre Irak,
as a matter of
es
fact,
un
the
libro
book is
sobre el
not
Estado
just about
Islámico,
Iraq,
las
but about
condiciones regionales
ISIS
y
and
internacionales de
regional
su
and
aparición
international
y su
conditions
despliegue.
for its appearance and
Los
deployment.
autores analizan el
The
proceso
authors
violento de
analyzed a
descomposición de
violent
Irak y Siria, el
process of
involucramiento
Iraq
de
and
países
Syria,
adyacentes
the
como Turquía y
involvement
Irán
of
y las
adjacent countries,
reacciones con
and the
frecuencia contradictorias
reactions, which
de los
sometimes
Estados
are contradictory,
Unidos y la
of
Unión
the
Europea.
US and the European Union.
Hoy vemos tal vez más claramente que hace
Today
un
we
año
see even
cómo
clearer
la
than a year
descomposición
ago
de los dos estados
how
afecta
the
no solo a toda
discomposition
la
of both
región,
states
sino que
affects not just the
amenaza
whole
directamente
region,
a Europa.
but also
La
directly
violencia
Europe.
en Irak y Siria
Violence
produce
in
y
Iraq and
exporta
Syria produces
millones de
and exports
refugiados que no se
thousands,
quedan en los campos
millions
en
of
Líbano, Turquía y
refugees who don't
Jordania,
stay
sino
in the
Afganistán y
refugee fields,
cruzaron las
but who
fronteras de la
have
Unión
crossed
Europea.
borders of the
Y
European
como
Union
vimos
yet
este
this year,
noviembre de
as we've seen,
2015,
November
la violencia en
2015,
la región produce y
violence in the
exporta
region
terror
produces and
hasta
exports
el
terror
corazón de Europa.
all the way to the heart of Europe.
Hay que integrar los
We
refugiados de
have
la
to
región.
integrate the
Este no
refugees
solo
from the
es un
region.
deber
It is not
humanitario,
just a
sino que para
humanitarian
nuestras sociedades
duty, but for
enriquecidas,
our
una
eight
oportunidad económica extraordinaria.
societies a great
Y
economic
hay que
opportunity.
luchar contra el
We
terror
have to
sin
fight
caer
against
en la
terror
trampa del
without
terror.
falling in terrorist
La
trap,
trampa que el
a
terrorismo
trap that
construye contra la
terrorism
revuelta,
builds with
la de una
it a
reacción
strike
excesiva que
of an
produce
excessive reaction that
automáticamente
would
más
produce
terroristas.
more terrorism.
Como Karim Hauser escribe en la
As Karim
introducción del libro,
Hauser writes in the
la lucha
introduction
contra el
of the
Estado
book,
Islámico
the
requiere
fight against
atacar las
the
raíces del
Islamic
fenómeno
State
y no las
means to
síntomas.
attack the
Pienso que este
roots of
libro
the
es un
phenomena
buen
and not
ejemplo
its
que nos
symptoms. I think
muestra
this book is a good
cómo
example
distinguir entre raíces
which
y
proves how
síntomas.
to
Muchas
differentiate
gracias.
between roots and symptoms. Thank you very much.
Gracias a Michael Erke
Thank you,
de la
Michael
Fundación
Erke from
Friedrich
the
Ebert,
Friedrich Ebert
sin la
Foundation,
cual
without which
este proyecto,
this
este
project,
libro,
this book,
Irak en la encrucijada o Iraq
Iraq at a
Crossroads,
Crossroads,
no
would
hubiera sido
not have been
posible.
possible.
Es cada vez más importante que
It's
las
more and more
instituciones
important that
cooperen entre
institutions
ellas
would
y
cooperate amongst them,
aquellos que nos dedicamos
and that the
a
ones
producir
devoted
análisis
to
y a
produce
poder
analysis and to
justamente invitar a analistas desde fuera
invite
para contribuir al
foreigner
pensamiento y
analysts
a
to
dilucidar
contribute
lo
to
que
the
acontece en
thought and
Oriente
to
Medio y en el norte
know
de
what's
África,
happening in the Middle East and
podamos
north
cada
of
vez
Africa.
estar,
We
digamos,
can
trabajar en red, que a fin de
work in a
cuentas
network, which
es
at the end of the
un
day,
esfuerzo
it's an
que rinde sus
effort
frutos para todas nuestras
which is
instituciones
quite
y desde luego
useful
para
for all our
el
institutions and,
público
of course,
en
for
general.
the
Voy a
public in
explicar muy
general.
brevemente
I
cómo
will
vamos
explain quite briefly
a proceder
how we
en
will
esta conferencia
proceed
o
in
mesa
this
redonda
conference or
para
round
después
table, so afterwards
pasar directamente
we can
al
move
debate y esto va a ser
straight to
en
the
inglés.
debate, which
Entonces,
will
para
happen in
aquellos que
English.
no tengan
So if you
cascos
don't
y
have
que deseen
translation
escuchar la
headphones and you would
interpretación
like to listen to the simultaneous
este es un buen
translation,
momento
it's a
para
good
hacerlo.
moment to go and get your
Haremos
headphones.
primero una exposición, cada
First,
uno
there
de
will
los
be
de los
a
ponentes hará una
presentation by
exposición
each of
de
the
entre 10
speakers
y 15
between
minutos.
10 and 15 minutes.
Después yo les haré a cada uno
Afterwards,
de ellos un par de
I will
preguntas
ask a
y después
couple of
daremos
questions to each of
el
them,
turno a
and then we
vosotros,
will
a la
open the
audiencia,
floor
para que hagan sus preguntas
for
por
questions
escrito
In
también tenemos
Brighton,
unos volantes en
we
la entrada
have
para que hagáis las
piece
preguntas
of
por escrito
papers
y aquí
at the
se las
entrance so you
leeremos
can
a
write down your
los ponentes.
questions and we will read
So,
them to the speakers.
switching to English, welcome to Casa Árabe and to this conference, Iraq at a Crossroads. This, as Michael Erke from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation mentioned at the beginning, is the result of a seminar organized together with Casa Árabe a year ago, and also with the collaboration of Fride and our friend Bara Mikhail, who's also with us today. Our original lineup included academics, journalists, and advisors, almost policymakers of different backgrounds. As many of you know, there's always difficulties in gathering the papers and in matching the deadlines, and so we're very happy to have this. It's an achievement to have this book with us available today, fresh from the print. It is also available online. It's a PDF that you can download and print out. It's both on Casa Árabe and on the Friedrich Ebert's websites. So this is also part of our mission and our agreement with our partners is to have this available freely for all of you. Today, two actors of the original cast are here. So Hayder al-Khoei, Associate Fellow in Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. Mohammad Ali Shabani is his Iran Pulse editor at Al-Monitor. They both contributed with articles in this volume, Iraq at a Crossroads. And we brought all the way from Amman an experienced voice to tackle the Sunni Arab dimension. He's Yahya al-Kubaisi, to my left, consultant for the Iraqi Center for Strategic Studies. So first, I'll just give you a very quick summary of the book. There's 9 articles that tackle the domestic dynamics. So we go first for the Sunni Arab. The chapter is called Daesh, a long decade of Sunni Arab alienation in Iraq and the Middle East. Then Hayder's chapter, Iraq after ISIS, Shia militancy and Iranian influence. Then the Kurdish question and the fight against Islamic State. So you have Sunni, Shias and Kurds. Then we go to the regional dynamics with Iranian policy towards post-Saddam Iraq, the article by Mohammad Ali. Daesh in Syria, major potential for expansion by Fabrice Balanche. Turkey's foreign policy towards Iraq by Nur Cetinoglu. And then we move to the international dimension with bombing from behind, an assessment of US strategy vis-à-vis ISIL by Jean-Loup Samaan, the EU's diverging strategy for a changing Iraq by Oz Hassan, and the humanitarian disaster in Iraq, beyond the atrocities of Daesh by Pedro Rojo. These articles, as you heard, end up delving into the so-called Islamic State, Daesh, ISIS, ISIL, IS. As I mentioned in my introduction, we don't really attach too much importance as to how we call it. I think we all know that it is very present, that it is a huge disruptive force, almost disproportionate to its sudden appearance and growth. The fall of Mosul in June 2014 is also mentioned very often in the chapters. It is seen as a watershed moment, one in which the territorial gains become really a source of concern and of worry. Almost 1/3 of the Iraqi territory was lost, and the so-called caliphate suddenly took shape and went beyond only a narrative. This, I think, is very important in explaining the way this phenomenon has grasped the attention of would-be recruits. The region is also becoming more and more complex and more volatile. Besides the very often cited Iranian-Saudi competition and the role of other Gulf states, now we know that something in Paris can affect Raqqa very quickly. The incident also this morning involving Russia and Turkey threatens the diplomatic efforts over Syria at a time when divisions between Moscow and the West seemed at least too narrow. So I think, we are, this volume comes at a moment where, as Mikhail Erki was pointing out, things are still moving very fastly, and more analysis is needed to understand what is happening in the region, and we need to react accordingly. So we'll start with Yahya al-Kubaisi. The first article we have in the book by Miriam Ben Raad establishes that Daesh is the result of grievances in the Arab Sunni camp that go back to at least 2003, but on successive occasions, elections, the Sahwa, this awakening that that took place in 2007, 2008, the failure of the government of Maliki to be inclusive, have made these grievances more and more acute. They haven't been dealt with and have increased that resentment. There's also a lack of leadership that has also played, and that can't be underestimated, because the elites have been unable to reach also political agreements. So I'll leave Yahya al-Kubaisi to give us his point of view for the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you. It is very difficult to talk about Iraq in 10 to 15 minutes. I think, the Iraq problem from 2003 till now, it's about 15 years, and we have many kind of clashes in these years. But I will talk briefly about the current problem in Iraq, especially with ISIL. For me, I think the crisis in Iraq is political in the first place. And I think that ISIL is a kind of a product of this main problem, what I always called it the Sunni problem in Iraq. If we return to what happened in 2003, the American invasion, the fall of Ba'ath regime in Iraq, and try to analyze what happened in the first 2 years, from 2003 till the end of 2005, when this new constitution in Iraq, we will find that the Sunnis didn't accept the new situation in Iraq at all. If we return to history, especially in 2003, we will find that all Sunnis stand against this invasion. Not because they are Ba'athis or they are allies of Saddam Hussein. I think they fear that this invasion threats their existence, especially with the idea that the Sunnis in Iraq is only a minority, maybe their percentage in Iraqi popularity according to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in United States, if you return to their reports about freedom of religion, you will find that the percentage of Sunnis, according to this report, is between 15 to 16%. So from the beginning, we see this, what I can call it, unaccepting of this invasion. Lately, we see that some Sunnite groups, especially the Islamic Party, and some individuals enter what they call it Majlis al-Hukm at that time, or Authority Council. And we find a kind of sectarian dividing to the Iraqi popularity. If you return to this 25-person represent Iraqis in this council, you will see that 50 plus 1 to the Shiite, 20% to Sunni, 20% to Kurd, and the others to the Turkmen and the Christian in Iraq. The Iraqi Sunni didn't accept that they are minority in Iraq. And till now, you will find some politician say we are not minority in Iraq. We represent maybe more than 55, sometimes they say 65. You will listen to different statistics about that. Historically, we don't, in Iraq, we don't have any statistic that say that the Sunni in Iraq represent this percentage and the Shiite in Iraq represent this percentage. We don't have such statistics. And all these numbers, I mean, we found the numbers, we found it in Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the United States and other, depend on a kind of expectation. I mean, for me, I know that maybe my colleagues know that Hanna Batato, for example, in his book in 1978, said that the Sunni percentage in Iraq is about 19%, and he depend on that on the Iraqi statistic in 1957, for example. If we return in history to the period of the 20s when the British Army invasion Iraq, you will see that we had a statistic in 1990, I think, say that the percentage of Sunni of the Shiite represent about 60% of Iraqi population. But for me, the main issue here that the Sunni didn't accept such numbers. This is and so they refused to participate in a new system in Iraq. And the parties, especially the Islamic Party at that time, who accepted to be in the council with some individuals, they didn't represent anything. If you return to the names, you will see 5 Sunnis, 1 represent the Islamic Party, and the other 4 didn't represent anything. One of them came from outside, Samir Sumaidai. The other individuals in Iraq, they didn't had any real influence in Sunni community. So the problem began with the invasion. After that, we came to the right of the constitution, and at that time we know that the Sunni didn't go to election. They refused to participate in election of 2005, in beginning of 2005. So they didn't represent in the committee that should wrote the constitution. So the Americans insist that some also individuals, Sunni individuals, participate in such thing. This is against the constitution of 2004, but no one stand on this matters. What I want to say is the Sunni problem began with the invasion in 2003. And for me, al-Qaeda between 2003 and 2006 and ISIL is a kind of result of this problem. And for me also, if we don't try to solve the main problem, the Sunni problem in Iraq, we cannot defeat Daesh. When Daesh came to invade Mosul in mid of 2014, the Sunni community didn't treat Daesh as an enemy. It is very important matter. The Sunni community in all governorate invaded by Daesh didn't treat Daesh as enemy because they think that Daesh and the Iraqi government is the same evil. So we cannot fight an evil for the interest of the other evil. I think this situation is very dilemma. So how we can defeat Daesh in such a situation? Till now, if I may I say, al-Abadi failed to get a one Sunnite allies from 2014 till now. For more than about 14 months now, he didn't get any new allies. All his allies now, the people who fight, the Sunnite people who fight with the government, with the Shiite militia, is the ex-allies to al-Maliki. So we in the Sunnite community, we have this problem. No one trusts the government. No one trusts the state, not only government, because when I talk about government, I talk about al-Abadi, about the Council of Ministers. No one trusts the government. No one trusts the justice system in Iraq. I mean, for the Sunni. No one trusts the army. No one trusts the security forces. So in such situation, how you can defeat Daesh? So if the government, I mean Iraqi government, didn't take a real political procedures to convince people, Sunni people, that the government, the state is better than Daesh, it's better than ISIL. The Iraqi government, the state is a kind of umbrella to the Sunni community. I think the Iraqi government with the international coalition cannot defeat Daesh, because Daesh, ISIL always take a kind of hadaya, what they call it, hadaya, a gift from the government. For example, when the government enter Tikrit and the militia make some mistakes there, it is a kind of gift to Daesh, to talk with the Sunni people that we represent the umbrella that can protect you, not the government, not the security forces, not the Shiite militia. So I think we must face the real problem in Iraq. It's the Sunnite problem in Iraq. It is not Daesh. Daesh is a kind of a product of this problem. And if we cannot try to solve this problem, we cannot defeat Daesh. It is final. The second thing I want to talk about is my colleagues here talk about what he call it inclusive government of al-Maliki. If we return to numbers, we will find that the Sunnite ministries in the ministry councils led by al-Maliki is more than the Sunnite ministries represent in al-Abadi government. So no one can say that the Abadi government is more inclusive than al-Maliki government. No, the government depends on the numbers of seats of the Sunnite groups, the Shiite groups, the Kurdish groups. The problem is not in numbers. The problem is, did the Sunnite participate in the authority? This is the main problem. This is the main question. It is not the question of numbers. Because if we return to Saddam regime, we will find that there is some Shiite represent in his government. Some Shiite, after 1991, he put Saadun Hammadi, Dr. Saadun Hammadi at that time, he's a Shiite person, as a prime minister after 1991. But I don't think there is a single Shiite person in Iraq think that Saadun Hammadi represents the Shiite in Iraq. The same problem is now. And no one in Sunni community think that Osama al-Najafi, the assistant of the president, the vice president, or the other ministries can do anything in Iraq. And this is the truth. I can talk about that because most of these politicians are my friend, and I know they cannot even move their personal security without the order from above, from al-Abadi, from the security forces. So we cannot talk about numbers here. We not talk about a problem in the political system in Iraq. I think the political system in Iraq created in 2005 with the constitution cannot work. And I think if we not rewrite this political system, we cannot solve the Sunnite problem in Iraq, so we cannot defeat Daesh. I have time or?
Yeah, you have 2 or 3 minutes.
So the real problem in Iraq is in the political system. The political system protects the Sunnite problem. The Sunnite problem protects Daesh. So we cannot begin from down and to defeat Daesh, to solve the Sunnite problem, to solve the political system problem. I think we must begin from above. We must, as I say, rebuild the political system to solve the Sunnite problem. At that time, we can talk about defeated Daesh. At that time, we can talk that the Sunnite community will participate in the military actions against Daesh. Without that, I don't think we can defeat Daesh. Yes, theoretically, we can take Tikrit, we can take Ramadi tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We can also take Mosul after 6 months, 1 year. But this situation will not solve the Daesh problem in Iraq, ISIL problem in Iraq, and not solve the Sunnite problem in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you, Yahya al-Kubaisi. As we were mentioning at the beginning, we very often take the symptoms for the problem, and it is true that many analysts and commentators agree that Daesh is a symptom of deeper problems that haven't been tackled, that haven't been addressed, and this has resulted in an ever-increasing force and strength of this terrorist organization. We'll move to Hayder al-Khoei. His chapter is called Shia, Militancy and Iranian Influence. It emphasizes the fact that, amongst many other things, that Iran didn't abandon Iraq when Baghdad was very close to ISIS danger, whereas the US did. However, Washington and Tehran have a very awkward relationship in Iraq. They are both strategic partners of Iraq. Intelligence is somehow shared in a tacit agreement. But Hayder, then in your article you describe the pool of Shia militias that are non-state groups, non-state actors that have become increasingly more and more powerful, amongst them Asaib Ahl al-Haq, for instance. Now many of them under the umbrella of the Hashd al-Shabi, the Popular Mobilization Forces. You do mention that although this Hashd al-Shabi was initially just made up of Shias, they seem to have evolved and now include apparently over 10% of their 124,000 fighters. That 10% is Sunni. So you do mention that they are united apparently against a big danger, which is Daesh. But once this danger is diluted, I wouldn't say disappeared, what would happen afterwards? But anyway, I'll leave you to give us a presentation of your chapter.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to thank Karim, Casa Árabe, and the Friedrich Ebert Foundation for hosting this evening's discussion and for inviting me here to speak to you. As Karim mentioned, I'll be speaking about the rise of the Shia paramilitaries who have become an increasingly integral part of the campaign against ISIS. But before that, I just want to make a broad comment about Iraq and the analysis of Iraq. The sectarian lens that is often used to analyze Iraq, I think obscures as much as it explains the complex realities on the ground. We currently have Shia-Shia conflict, Sunni-Sunni conflict, Kurdish conflict. And of course, in the fight against ISIS, we have Shias, Sunnis, and Kurds all fighting against this terrorist organization. So as Karim mentioned, and I think this can't be emphasized enough, the conflict is dynamic, it's fluid, and it's changing very rapidly. So it's important not to get stuck in a black and white, simplistic, analytical framework when looking at the country. I don't think anybody can deny Iraq suffers from sectarianism. In fact, sectarianism in Islam is as old as Islam. And one of the most powerful myths that is taken as fact by many Iraq observers is this notion that we didn't have sectarianism before 2003, that all of this started just with the American invasion. And I think this is both nonsense and ahistorical. Of course, there's no time here today to go into 7th century, 10th century, even 16th century, very violent, bloody episodes of Shia-Sunni massacres both ways. But when discussing the role of the Shia militias in post-2003 Iraq, I think it's important to put them into the context of pre-2003 Iraq. It was the sectarian policies of the Ba'ath regime which drove many Shia Iraqis towards violent resistance. Shia rituals were banned, systematically banned. Hundreds of thousands were deported as fifth columnists and traitors. Mosques, libraries, schools were burnt down and bulldozed by the Iraqi regime. Dissidents, religious clerics, leaders, ayatollahs were tortured, executed, and exiled from Iraq. And as a result, this is why many Iraqis, Shia Iraqis, fought with Iran against Iraq. It's not because they're fighting with a foreign government against their own government. It's not as simple as that. They were fighting against the oppressive regimes of Saddam. So many will claim there was no sectarianism in 2003, but the Shia were kept quiet through this oppressive violence. They were literally kept quiet in their mass graves. Very few Shia, very few Iraqis even dared to speak of sectarianism during the Saddam reign. So the absence of sectarian discourse in pre-2003 is not the absence of sectarianism. You can imagine how awkward it is for Iraqi soldiers, rank and file, vast majority of whom are Shia, to speak to the officer corps, vast majority of whom are Sunni, about sectarian dynamics. So in 2003, the Shia militias found an opportunity to flourish and merge with the newly established security services, particularly after the Americans disbanded the previous military and security apparatuses. Those militias were heavily involved in the sectarian and bloody civil war that broke out as the insurgency became more powerful. The Americans lost control until about 2007 and 8 in the Sunni heartlands, but with the help of Sunni Arab tribes, managed to regain control. In the Shia heartlands, by 2008, the Shia militias were effectively running the show, completely out of control, and that's why former Prime Minister Maliki in Basra initially confronted and then defeated the militias. The situation in Iraq was relatively calm, and I stress the word relatively, by 2011, but a number of things happened in quick succession which led to the rise of ISIS. At the end of 2011, the US withdrew all its combat troops from Iraq, leaving a very large security vacuum. In 2012, immediately afterwards, the Sunni protest movement began, initially very peaceful protest movement, which challenged the authority of the central government. It was then hijacked by more extreme elements after Maliki, the former prime minister, increasingly used draconian and heavy-handed security measures to deal with terrorism. So in Iraq, often after explosions, hundreds, an entire neighborhood would be, the military-aged Sunni civilians would be arrested in the hopes of catching one or two terrorists. And the government would arrest those one or two terrorists, but hundreds of innocent Sunnis would be imprisoned. And of course, in jail, those innocent Sunni Arabs became radicalized by the jihadis who effectively ran the prisons, the most powerful groups inside the prisons. And that's why Camp Buka, for example, became literally a university for the jihadists. So this all created very fertile ground for ISIS. They began regrouping and emerged as a much stronger force with no US military to check them. And of course in 2011, the Syrian conflict began, and that's another crucial factor. ISIS very crudely saw an opportunity to merge the battlefields in Iraq and Syria, and of course at the same time Shia militias also began in their hundreds and then in their thousands traveling to Syria to confront the rising jihadist threats there. Many of these fighters, and Muhammad Ali will speak more about Iran, but many of them are trained, funded and equipped by Iran directly. 2014, as Karim mentioned, was a turning point in Iraq's history, not just because of the 1/3 of territory that was taken by ISIS, but I think politically this set in force motions that will last with us for years, if not decades to come. So it was a watershed moment in Iraq's contemporary history because of the response, the regional international response to ISIS. The Americans made a very tactical, short-sighted decision to withhold all military support to the Iraqi government, whilst ISIS were literally knocking on the gates of Baghdad. The Iranians, I think, made a very strategic decision, which was to continue supporting the Iraqi government and make themselves indispensable regardless of the politics in Baghdad. And in the summer of 2014, a Western-educated Shia Iraqi politician, a senior politician, told me, and I quote, both the US and Iran are our strategic allies, but the Iranians didn't let us down in our time of need. And I say this is the Western-educated Shia politician. So you can imagine the pro-Iranian Shia politicians and how they viewed Iran's support. And of course, in March 2015, the Americans for the first time admitted the real danger Baghdad was in. Ambassador Brett McGurk, who's currently now the presidential envoy of the anti-ISIL coalition, told an audience in the American University of Iraq, Suleimaniya, that the Americans assessed, days after Mosul fell, that Baghdad itself could fall within 72 hours. So Baghdad, there was a potential of the capital falling. On the one hand, you have the Iranians who immediately mobilized, and on the other hand, the Americans who did nothing and made a deliberate decision of doing nothing. And I was in Baghdad on June the 10th when Mosul fell. And within hours, less than 24 hours, the IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard General Qasem Soleimani, was in the capital on the outskirts, making sure the Iraqi forces were prepared for an ISIS assault. But when speaking of the Shia militias and their mobilization, it's impossible to discuss this without referring to the role played by Grand Ayatollah Sistani in Iraq. On June the 13th, just days after the fall of Mosul and later Tikrit, he issued a historic fatwa calling on all able-bodied Iraqi citizens to take up arms against ISIS. And to put this into historical perspective, the last time this happened in Iraq was in 1914, when the British invaded the country. In 100 years, there hasn't been such a fatwa. And unfortunately, much of the media, both regional and international, focused on the sectarian dimension. Here's a Shia Ayatollah issuing a call to arms to the Shia to fight the Sunnis. And of course, this couldn't be further from the truth. And I had the privilege of meeting Ayatollah Sistani just one day after he issued his fatwa. And he was dismayed by this media spin. He repeated his oft-quoted line that the Sunnis are not just our brothers, they are ourselves. Sistani spoke of ISIS as a threat to everyone in Iraq and not just the Shia. And indeed, his call to defend Iraq's sacred sites wasn't just a reference to the Shia shrines and mosques, but to the Sunni, Christian and other places of worship too. So after the fatwa, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis mobilized and volunteered to fight Daesh or ISIS. And the Hashd al-Sha'bi was created. It's the Iraqi government's umbrella organization to bring together these various militia groups, and in many cases rivals of each other, together to fight a common enemy. And Hashd al-Sha'bi in English is popular mobilization, and hence why they're known as the popular mobilization units or forces. What's crucial to bear in mind is earlier this year, this committee, this umbrella was officially tied to the office of the Prime Minister, Hayder al-Abadi, under the National Security Council. So many of these militia groups went overnight, well, almost overnight, from being outlaw militias to the official state-sponsored paramilitary organization. And that's why I refer to them as the paramilitary forces. But perhaps more importantly, as Karim mentioned, they are no longer an exclusively Shia force. They were in June 2014, and that's no longer the case today. I think the liberation of Tikrit, Saddam's hometown, earlier this year was successful, and this is important to bear in mind, not just because of the US airstrikes, but because the Iraqi security services were supported by both Shia and Sunni paramilitary fighters. Up to 2,000 to 3,000 Sunnis fought alongside the Shia paramilitaries in Tikrit, many of them members of the Salah ad-Din tribes. And of course, regardless of the Sunni Shia paramilitary cooperation, we do have to bear in mind that at both rank and file and officer corps level, the Iraqi army itself is mixed in terms of Shia and Sunni soldiers and officers. So wherever the Iraqi army is fighting, even without the Hashd al-Sha'bi, even without Sunni tribesmen, it is a Sunni Shia force. It's difficult to give a precise number of the Hashd al-Sha'bi because every commander claims he has more men than he actually does. But figures on the lower end of the range are 20 to 30,000 minimum, and on the higher end is 120,000. The Sunni forces of those are between 5 and 17, of course, according to who you speak to. Another important shift in the US position towards these groups, initially the US didn't want to engage and in fact didn't want to participate in any battle where those Shia paramilitary forces were involved. But this policy has fundamentally changed. You have the US ambassador now who publicly says the United States is willing to work with the paramilitary forces if they are under the command of the Iraqi government. A US general just days ago said that between 15 and 20% of the Hashd al-Sha'bi paramilitary forces qualify for direct US military assistance, aside from the support the Americans are giving to the Iraqi army. So this shift is of course directly linked to the US-Iran, developing US-Iran relations. In the beginning there was a period of open but undeclared warfare. This then changed to what military analysts call military deconfliction, being aware of each other's movements and trying to stay out of each other's way. But with the liberation of Tikrit and Amirli in the north of Iraq, it's no longer deconfliction. You have Iranian-backed Iraqi forces who are advancing on a city, and you have the Americans launching airstrikes against ISIS defenses. Now, of course, both the Iranians and the Americans will say we're not talking to each other and we're not coordinating with each other. But the Iraqis laugh when you tell them this, because sometimes the Iranians and Americans are in the Ministry of Defense in Baghdad, just in different rooms. But they're talking to the same people and they're coordinating essentially with the same army. And I think given the successful nuclear negotiation between Iran and the P5+1, Iraq is a country where we could potentially, and of course this isn't set in stone, see more cooperation between the Americans and the Iranians. And this is what makes Iraq so different to Syria. And this is why Syria is much more complicated than Iraq. In Iraq, the US and Iran shares both common enemies and a common friend. In Syria, the Americans and Iranians share a common enemy in ISIS, but they don't share a common friend. Do I have a few minutes, Karim? Or?
Couple, 2.
2 minutes. I just wanted to briefly discuss the official Iraqi security forces and contrast them to the Shia paramilitaries to hopefully explain why they're so popular today. The paramilitary Hashd al-Sha'bi forces are very much ideological. The Iraqi army isn't, for example, like the Syrian army or the Iranian army, which is ideological. So the paramilitary fighters are very tough, and they're not just fighting for salary at the end of the month. And in fact, many Shia have left their day jobs to pick up arms and fight against ISIS, often not being paid on time every month. And where the Iraqi army failed, the Hashd al-Sha'bi or popular mobilization forces have been very successful. And the Hashd al-Sha'bi isn't plagued by the same systematic corruption that plagues the Iraqi security forces. There is no chance for a Hashd al-Sha'bi fighter to be sold out by his commanding officer. And this isn't about being Sunni or Shia. A Shia soldier in the Iraqi security forces cannot entirely trust even his own Shia commanding officer. And as we saw in Camp Speicher, 1,700 Shia soldiers were separated from their Sunni comrades and summarily executed by ISIS. So that's why today many Iraqis prefer fighting for the paramilitary and prefer their sons fighting for the paramilitary forces. And in fact, we even have examples, maybe not many, of Shia soldiers defecting from the army and joining the Hashd al-Sha'bi. And more importantly, they've taken back significant territory from ISIS. Beiji, Diyala, Tikrit, Jurf al-Sakhar, south of Baghdad, the Baghdad belts as they're known, the towns around the capital. These have all been significant hotbeds of terrorism which have been cleared. And this is why today there's a marked decrease in the number of attacks in the capital. And to conclude, Karim, where ISIS has won territory since June of last year, for example in Anbar, and more significantly when the provincial capital Ramadi fell in May earlier this year, the Shia paramilitary forces were not present. It was just an official Iraqi security force and local policemen. But this is the point I want to conclude with. It was the Sunni local government of Anbar, the democratically elected representatives of the people of Anbar, who publicly, on 2 occasions, voted for the Shia paramilitaries to enter Anbar and help them retake the city. So in a country that is supposedly tearing itself apart along sectarian lines, I think this is very significant. And I think we should pay more attention to what the Sunnis in Iraq are saying, and those who have been elected by their constituencies and are legitimate representatives. And I think that's the biggest difference between the Shia post-2003 that Yahya mentioned. The Shia pre-2003 were selected by Saddam and the Ba'ath regime. The Sunnis in post-2003 Iraq are elected. So we can have a debate about who these groups are and why the Islamists are sometimes more popular than the nationalists, but regardless of the makeup of the Sunni component in Iraq's political process, they are the elected representatives of the Sunnis in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayder al-Khoei, for this outlook on the Shia communities and militancy that definitely takes us from what you mentioned at the beginning, this black and white frame of mind, and the fact that we very often categorize in very rigid categories the communities in Iraq and how they interact. We'll move to Mohammad Ali Shabani and his chapter that also tackles specifically the Iranian influence. In your chapter, Mohammad Ali, far from a simplistic sectarian reading, just like Hayder was mentioning, in which Iranian and Shia interests would align and could probably, favor an oil-rich statelet in the Iraqi south, like in this scenario where Iraq would be split in 3 and we would see the south become a small state, a small Shia state. You argue that Tehran actually wouldn't favor a scenario like that. It would prefer much better a territorial integrity. You talk also about something that I'm sure you will explain better, about qualified stability. That is something that Iran wants in its neighbor. In a way, it wants an Iraq that, put it very simply, is not way too powerful, but is neither a dangerous failed state in which all these non-state actors prevail. You also tackle energy policies and the fact that Iran favors cooperation rather than confrontation. And you go through several strategies that Iran has, amongst them hedging, that I would like you to explain a bit more. But your 15 minutes are yours.
First of all, thank you so much for organizing the roundtable last year. I found it very fruitful, and I'm happy to see the product today. I think I'd like to begin with maybe taking some of the points that my colleagues brought up. It's a very loud echo on this one. I think what Mr. Kubaisi talked about in terms of lack of recognition of new realities on the ground in Iraq is a key theme of how Iran views Iraq. It sees two major problems right now involving the Sunni community in Iraq. One is a lack of recognition of new realities which were brought about by the US-led invasion in 2003. And Mr. Kubaisi, he excellently brought up every single point in relation to that, so I will not expand very much. Apart from adding that there are also some forces outside Iraq, some regional powers, which have yet to also recognize these new realities. And to some extent, even the United States, which created this reality. So that's a key theme of Iranian policy towards Iraq. A second theme, again, which Mr. Kubaisi brought up, is issue of representation. Is a key Sunni problem. And one of the senior Iranian officials which I spoke with last summer, he said at the height of the ISIS splits in northern Iraq, when they took over Mosul and they were on their way to Baghdad, he said the Sunni MPs that they talked to in Baghdad, they couldn't call up 500 men. They had nobody to represent them. This is what the Iranians were saying, plainly. So what I want to go forward is to outline the broader parameters of Iranian policy towards Iraq, and then, as Karim said, the specific strategy which it's pursuing in practice. First of all, I think territorial integrity is of utmost importance for Iran. And there's a very simple reason for that. And that's that the disintegration of Iraq would open a Pandora's box. It's very simple. You don't know what's going to come next. Iran has no idea what's going to come next. Turkey doesn't know, Saudi doesn't know, the US doesn't know. Iraqis don't know either. Nobody knows. And I think for most powers in the region right now, under the current circumstances, you prefer the devil you know than the unknown. Hence, there's a lot of emphasis on keeping Iraq together, though there are a lot of forces that are trying to put it apart. There's a lot of talk, again, about the Kurdish issue, the matter of Kurdish secession. I think 99% of the debate about Iraq's disintegration focuses on that. But again, as Karim said, there's also the matter of the Southerners, increasingly talking about a federation of sorts, or even outright independence. One of the current leading commanders of the Popular Mobilization Forces, Hadi Amiri, who was actually based in Iran previously. In my research on relations between Iran and Iraq, I noted a quote from him back in 2005, in which he actually called for an outright semi-independent, semi-autonomous southern region by declaring that what have you seen from the central government but death? That's an exact quote from him. This is 2005. This is the man now fighting to hold Iraq together. So you see the shifts that's been going through and the underlying currents that still exist there. Right now, there's a lot of discussion about the Kurdish 17% share of Iraq's oil revenues. There's less talk about how 90% of Iraq's oil is exported through Basra, and you don't have proper sewage running or electricity in that city or schools. Having said that, looking ahead at the potential of the south, of the potential of our oil-rich, semi-autonomous Shia region. Just the other day, I saw in the news that there are now plans, at least on a piece of paper, that they're going to build the world's tallest tower in Basra, close to 1,000 meters high. This is the plan. I think Iraq, the southern Iraq in particular, has huge potential, and Iran sees that potential. It sees far beyond the lack of sewage, lack of electricity. It sees far down the line, and hence it's in Iran's interest to balance the different forces within Iraq, to seek exactly what Karim said, which is qualified stability, which is in one simple sentence, Iran has seen what a strong Iraq means, 1980 to 1988. It does not wish to see that return. At the same time, it does not want to see a failed state in which groups such as ISIL emerge and threaten Iran's national security. So in a very kind of nutshell format, that's the meaning of that term. Thirdly, I want to go into the economic aspect of the relationship between Iran and Iraq as well. Right now, the largest trade partner of Iraq, in non-oil terms, Iraq's main export is oil and constitutes over 90% of the central government's revenues. But the non-oil sector of the Iraqi economy is actually dominated by Turkey and not by Iran. Iran is the second largest trade partner, non-oil trade partner. And apart from that, 60% of Iranian trade with Iraq does not go through the south, it doesn't go through Baghdad, it goes through the north, through Kurdistan regional government. So we have a very complex web of economic influence in Iraq that Iran wields. And this also feeds into the idea of funding for different groups in Iraq. Prior to the 2012 US and EU sanctions on the Iranian oil industry as part of the pressure imposed on Iran over its nuclear program, Iran exported 2.5 million barrels of oil per day. At that time, Iraq exported 2 million. Thanks to the sanction, or as a consequence of the sanctions, Iraqi oil exports today and throughout the past 2 years have been double that of Iran. In 2013, Iraq exported $100 billion worth of oil, and Iran exported about 60 billion. This hasn't happened since the 1980s. And what's even more interesting is that even though Iran and Iraq are supposed to be very cordial, sectarian allies, most of the Iraqi share of the oil markets have been taken from Iran, so to speak. Where Iran has receded from different markets, Iraq has taken its place. But as I say in my paper, Iran has not chosen confrontation to deal with it, but co-option or cooperation. It has stepped up different energy-related cooperation, such as construction of pipelines. Since the past, we have different oil swaps where Iran receives crude oil and gives back refined products to Iraq. And also, apart from that, my third point, which I want to go into, is a matter of Iranian decision-making. The duality of power in Iran, where you have an unelected senior authority and a democratic component in the form of the executive branch, the presidency, has given rise to a very unique formation of power. You have decision-making in Iran with one ultimate decision maker, and you also have decision shaping. So in Iran, the decision-making process, there's a lot of talk about how Iran wields influence in Iraq, but the core question of how does Iran make decisions about Iraq, I think is very rarely answered in popular discourse and academic studies. Decision shaping involves lobbying for the various positions, the grand framework which the senior authority, the supreme leader, provides to the main decision-making body on Iraq, which is the Supreme National Security Council. So if you can picture a process in which the supreme leader sets a broad framework, that framework is given to the Supreme National Security Council, which is composed of the president, the foreign minister, interior minister, defense minister, intelligence minister, the heads of the various armed forces, parliament speaker, judiciary chief, etc. And at the end of it comes a decision by this council, which is then sent to the supreme leader for review, and the supreme leader can also veto it. My point here is that there are many different forces involved in decision making on Iraq and Iran. So while the decisions of the Supreme National Security Council are by consensus, and whatever comes out of it is implemented, the implementation of Iranian policy is not unitary in the sense that it does not carried out by one body. There's not one hotline between Tehran and Baghdad. It doesn't work like that. You have the foreign ministry, you have the clerical leadership in Qom, you have the Revolutionary Guards, as Hayder pointed out. So there's a plethora of different actors implementing this policy. And sometimes it's apparent that domestic politics in Iran feeds into domestic politics in Iraq and vice versa. I think one major mistake that's done when you review different literature on Iranian policy towards Iraq is that you see influence as a one-way street. And I would very strongly argue against that. One example of which is following the election of current moderate President Rouhani, the first trip by his foreign minister, Jawad Zarif, whose primary item on his agenda was not the region but the nuclear issue. He did not travel to Geneva or Vienna or Paris or London on his first trip upon becoming foreign minister in August 2013. He chose to travel to Iraq. And before he went to Baghdad, he went to Najaf. So the first person he saw was Grand Ayatollah Sistani. And as another example, in one of the negotiation rounds in January 2014, if I'm not mistaken about the dates, it was held in Geneva. And he didn't go to Tehran from Geneva. He actually went again to Najaf first, and then he went to Baghdad, and then he went to Tehran to brief, so to speak, the Grand Ayatollah. So you have a situation where different Iranian factions or players implementing the same grand strategy, but they're responsible for implementing various aspects of it, have shown different levels of activity over the years. So now with the current administration, you have more emphasis on certain aspects, interaction with certain aspects of the Iraqi state. And here I would count at this point Grand Ayatollah Sistani as a supra-state actor, but effectively under current circumstances, he is effectively some kind of state-linked actor, so to speak, particularly considering his backing for the prime minister. So in conclusion, going back to my main points, talking about the practical aspects of Iranian strategy, I want to emphasize 5 main points. And this also goes back to what Hayder was talking about earlier about Iranian ties with Iraqi groups which were in exile in Iran, etc. One, I think, is playing the long game. Iran has been very adept at that in Iraq. While the US, I think, has been very short-sighted in some of its decisions, it's been very ad hoc. Iran has had a grand strategy. Many of the factions which it's working with today, the 2 main leaders of the popular mobilization units, forces, were actually based in Iran for over 20 years. They were both fluent in Persian to the best of my knowledge. Hasht al-Shab in Arabic means popular mobilization forces. In Iran, we have a paramilitary militia which was set up in 1980, if I'm not mistaken, upon the order of the supreme leader at the time, Ayatollah Khomeini. And it's called Basij Mostazafin, the mobilization of the oppressed. So literally, Basij and Hasht means exactly the same word, and they're modeled exactly the same. So if you want an idea where the Hasht is going, look at the Basij. This is one way I would look at it. And another major faction which was based in Iran in the 1980s was, for example, the Badr organization. Hayder brought up the notion that there are many Iraqi Shiites moved to Iran during the 1980s to fight against Saddam's forces. But twisting the matter even more, many of the rank and file of the Iraqi army at the time, which was fighting against Iran, was also consisting of Shia, the non-officer corps. So it's a very twisted picture here. Where I think right now there are 2 main assumptions. One is that there's automatic amity on account of the shared sectarian identity of Iran and Iraq, and then there's automatic rivalry on account of the different ethnicities. I think neither is true. Reality is something along the lines probably of competitive cooperation. Going back to my points about the tactics of it, I think the second point to consider is Iran's adeptness at exploiting the mistakes of others. Here, again, I have to repeat what Hayder said about, in particular, 2014. You have ISIL at the gates of the capital. They were 30 minutes outside the Kurdistan regional government's capital as well, Erbil. There's this notion that the KRG is a oasis of calm in the region, and even when they took Mosul, they tried to shield themselves from that, but soon they woke up to the reality that the security of Iraq is the security of themselves. Iran also was the first to send weapons and supplies to the Kurdistan regional government. Again, shattering the idea that one of the main rivals of Iran in Iraq is Barzani. It was actually very grateful and very thankful for Iran's support. 3, I think Iran is very adept at utilizing Iraq's limited alliance options. Because of the, I think, region-wide lack of recognition of the new reality of the new Iraq. Just if you look at Saudi Arabia, which over a decade after the invasion has, had yet to send an ambassador. Even for the past years, they keep discussing sending an ambassador. I'm not sure if they appointed one. I'm not sure if they actually sent him now. Is he in Baghdad now? No. So it's what it's been, about 12 years now. We don't have a Saudi ambassador in Baghdad. So I think if you look at the region from the view of a Iraqi prime minister, you don't have very many alliance options, so to speak. Even if you don't want to go eastward, you will have to go eastward because nobody else is accepting you. Nobody else is. One of ex-Prime Minister Maliki's last words while in office was something along the lines of, he was referring to the Gulf Cooperation Council leaders as senile sheikhs. That's the actual word he used about them. It's by a prime minister of a country. So there's a lot of antagonist sentiment there. 4, I think Iran is very adept at not putting all of its eggs in the same basket. It helped facilitate an orderly and peaceful transfer of power in the summer of 2014. But it was less than 2 weeks after Maliki stepped down that he went to Tehran. And there he met with the highest authority, which is Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. And following that, he has maintained very close contacts with a close friend of his, which is General Soleimani. And even today, I think there's always the aspect of hedging. And I discussed this with an Iranian in Tehran at that time in the summer of 2014. And Iran was very, very well connected into these matters. And I asked him, what's the main requirements for Iran, for the Iraqi prime minister? What are the main characteristics? Are you wedded to Maliki's person? And he said, the only thing that matters to us is 2 things. One is that he has to be Shia. The second is that he has to be from Dawah. That's it. Then nothing else matters to us. The person of the prime minister is not very relevant to us. So this suggested to me that the strategy they're pursuing is very broad in the sense that unlike in Syria, where I think, again, they're not wedded to the person of Assad, but because there's a lack of alternatives, they're far more wedded to him in relation to the Iraqi scene. Iran has pursued a very effective strategy of hedging. And 5th, and finally, I would say that one of the keys to Iranian success in Iraq, and particularly in the past 2 years, has been respect for the red lines of Grand Ayatollah Sistani. I brought up the many visits by the Iranian foreign minister to him. Also, senior officials such as the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, former Defense Minister Shamkhani, had paid personal visits to him to help facilitate the orderly transfer of power in the summer of 2014. There are many question marks about the relationship between Grand Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei, and the relationship between the Iranian state and him. But I think many of those questions have been answered during the past 2 years, and we're seeing very much effective and constructive cooperation between the 2 sides now. And I think if you want one very astute example of how influence is a two-way street, how Iraqi influence plays into Iranian politics as well, look very closely at what happens around the office of Grand Ayatollah Sistani. I think my time is up, but those are my points. So I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Muhammad Ali, for also this explanation and analysis on how complex are the relations between Iran and Iraq, and can't be, classified just in terms of, as I said at the beginning, of sectarian identity. I'll move into my questions very short, so we can also give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. So I'll start in the same order, and of course you may wish also to recap or to raise any questions with your other colleagues. One question for Yahya al-Kubaisi. is regarding this ideological element that seems to be up in the air. Hayder mentioned it as well. The fact that some organizations rely heavily on ideology mixed with theology, and how there is an absence of alternatives in that sense, especially in the Sunni camp. If you see any potential and how would you know an appealing ideology within the Arab Sunnis in Iraq, do you see that taking shape? Do you see any potential leadership, and how would you see that happening?
Yeah, I cannot talk about ideological thoughts in Sunni community now. I think after what happened to the Ba'ath party, after what happened to the nationalist, Sunni nationalist in the 60s and 70s, I don't think we can talk about an ideology. I think we had a kind of principles more than an ideology. Till now, there is no kind of accepting of such principles between the Sunnite political leaders. I mean, there is a kind of real dividing in the Sunnite community. There is the real dividing in the Sunnite politician. As Hayder say, for example, for the people who join or participate in al-Hajj al-Shabi, for example, and this who fight with the Shiite militia against ISIL. For example, for many of Sunnite community, many of the Sunnite leaders, they think that these people who fight with the government didn't represent the community. I mean, I talk with people, they always compare between the Sunnite people who fight with the government with the Kurdish people who fight with the government in the 90s. In the 90s, some Kurdish groups, sorry, in the 80s, some Kurdish groups fight with Saddam regime against the Kurdish parties at that time. We have a kind of statistic, we have more than 100,000 Kurdish militia fight with the Saddam regime against the Kurd. Some Sunnite compare between these, and the Sunnite now fight with Daesh. I mean, at that time, Saddam regime called these Kurdish groups fight with him as al-Fursan. Oh, you can translate al-Fursan. Fursan. Knights. Yes. We can call, the Iraqi government called these Kurdish groups fight with them against other Kurdish groups as knights, while the Kurdish, especially the two parties in Iraq, call these people who fight with the government as donkeys, juhush. We have the same situation for some Iraqi politicians, for some Iraqi people, that the people who fight with the government is the same with Kurdish. So we cannot say that if there's maybe 6,000 to 10,000 Sunnite individuals fight with the government, that means there is a kind of a Sunnite accept for the government, or that the Sunnite accept what happened against ISIL or toward the government. No, I think that the situation is more complex. The situation is that there is a real dividing in the Sunnite community, a real dividing between the Sunnite politician about dealing with the government, about dealing with the ISIL, about dealing with the Hajj al-Shabi or this Shiite militia. I talk with many of these politicians. For example, some of them think that this Shiite militia is the most dangerous than ISIL. They think that, yes, ISIL is an enemy, but this militia is more evil than ISIL. So we have more than one idea about Sunnite, if we call it Sunnite community in Iraq. We don't have a kind of unity in this community, so we can talk about ideology or talk about principles that everyone agree with it.
Okay, Hayder, I was wondering if, I mean, we have mentioned how Daesh after Mosul has increased its strength, its importance, and also in one of the chapters of our book, there's a description of the success of Daesh in controlling and in delivering actually services and improving the systems of governance in specific areas, Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, Mosul as well. So against this success that ISIS, admittedly with, of course, terrorizing methods, with repression, but they are providing services that the central government is failing to provide in this area. So how do you see? I mean, do you think that we just heard also that the South is lacking in many of these services? So is there a problem within the government and within also the Shia militancy in terms of governance and in being able to provide the systems of governance that Daesh apparently is very effective at providing?
Yes, I think there's a very big problem. And Basra, which produces around 90% of Iraq's resources, according to the United Nations, is one of the most impoverished provinces in Iraq. And increasingly we're hearing local Shias upset for the very same reasons the Sunnis in Ramadi or Fallujah are upset. The lack of services, the lack of security, the corruption. I don't want to say it makes it better, but because it lacks the sectarian connotations that a protest in Ramadi and Fallujah will have, it's seen as less threatening to the central government. But the central government, as I alluded to, the corruption that plagues it is systematic in every single state institution. And this cuts across Sunni, Shia, Kurdish politicians. You know, even Kurdistan as Muhammad Ali, it's seen as this oasis. No, they have exactly the same corruption, but it's easier to understand because there are two important parties. You know, you bribe one of those and you're okay. In the south and in Baghdad, it's much more complicated. You know, which Sunni politician do you have to bribe and which Shia politician do you have to bribe? But I think the popular protests now are a very big wake-up call to the Iraqi government. We're seeing civil society organization, youth-led mass protests in Iraq, from Baghdad all the way to the south. And one of the more interesting phenomena is these protests cut sectarian, they're cross-sectarian in their demands and in their natures. You know, in Anbar you had Qadimun ya Baghdad, you know, we are coming for you, which is what freaked out not just the central government, but the Iranians and some of the Shia militia forces. And really, when you talk to Iraqis, especially in Baghdad, they see no other option but to continue mobilizing mass protests. You know, some talking of even invading the green zone, which is the bubble that protects the Iraqi central government. But yes, absolutely, the problems that Yahya mentioned, they're from north to south and cover every single province and city in Iraq. And the Iraqi government lacks I don't want to say unified, but any strategy to deal with it. And Abadi now, though he's seen as the best option we have, his hands are tied behind his backs. If Abadi goes after corruption, the Prime Minister is going to go after the very corruption that enables him to survive and stay in power. So it's a catch-22 for Baghdad.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Muhammad Ali, I wanted to take I mean, you've done a brilliant analysis on Iran-Iraq relations, and obviously this is a conference on Iraq, but given the fact that we have so many international players, I wanted to ask you about Russia and how you view Tehran-Moscow relations. I understand, you know, Putin's visit to Tehran may mark the start of a new geostrategic configuration of power in the region. I don't know if this is how you view it.
There's a very complicated question to answer. It has two answers. One is yes. Putin's visit, his first time in 8 years, he's been to Iran. He met with all of the senior leaders, the president, the supreme leader. He had very fruitful conversations, I think, on both bilateral cooperation and also the region. It was reiterated, I think, in one sentence. He said that in a meeting with the supreme leader, what's unlike certain players in the region, we don't stab our friends in the back. That's the quote from Putin. And actually today, after the missile strike by Turkey, not the missile, I think there's F-16 actually that shot down the other plane. Putin referred to that as a stab in the back. Yeah. So he's very focused on the whole idea of stabbing in the back, it appears. And I think many in Iran are concerned about being stabbed in the back by the Russians. We have the example of the stalled delivery of S-300 air defense missiles. I think the initial contract was signed over 10 years ago with the excuse of the UN Security Council resolutions, which were adopted after the signing of the contract and did not apply to defensive weapons to the best of my knowledge. The Russians used that as a kind of a tool to gain Western concessions on the other side. So they've withheld the delivery of those weapons, even though they were fully paid for. And Iran has taken Russia to court and won the settlement of $4 billion. We also have the example of the Bushehr nuclear power station, Iran's only civilian nuclear power plant. It was initially, the initial contract with the Russians to help build it. It was originally constructed by the Germans, but then it was abandoned after the revolution. And it was actually bombed by Saddam's forces 6 times throughout the Iran-Iraq war. So the Russians had a lot of work to do, but the initial contract was signed in 1992, if I'm not mistaken. It was completed, I think, about 2 years ago, 2013, 2012. So that's 20 years to build one reactor. And much of the delay was, again, due to the idea that some people in Tehran hold that Russia doesn't really have an independent Iran policy. Its policy towards Iran is a factor of its relationship with, say, the United States or Europe. So the second viewpoint, which I'm referring to now, which says that Russia is not an ally of Iran, contends that Russia is actually a competitor of Iran in Syria. And Russia's entry in Syria, in effect, exposes Iran to the danger of the Russians striking a deal with the West over its head. So you have very competing strands of thought in Iran on how the Russian role is viewed. And I think it's too early to draw definitive lines about what official Iranian policy is, because there are a lot of debate and discussions going on. But again, I think the answer to your question is both yes and no, depending on how you look at it. I would say no right now. I would say no personally.
I was going to ask, what does Qasem Soleimani believe?
I think he's right there in the middle. I think he's right there in the middle. I think he's waiting to see what materializes out of the Russian intervention. I think it's too soon.
Okay, whilst we get this, the questions from the audience, there's been a lot of talk lately in the media and amongst specialists on the role of this apocalyptic vision. I was just speaking to Hayder before the conference, but the fact that basically amongst Daesh followers, but also increasingly in other circles, there's a sense, there's this psychological warfare where this vision that we're very near the end of the world or whatever really adds to the would-be recruits' willingness to join. I don't know if this is a perception that you've come across when with your contacts, when you read also tweets, the papers. Yahya?
Yes, 2 days ago, one of my friend, and I think Hayder know him, is a journalist, Sarmad al-Ta'i, sent a message to me by Twitter that he thinks that everyone go to Armageddon. I mean, the battle between the evil and the... yes, I think there's a kind of extend thought, especially in our region, that yes, there is a kind of fight between not the end of the world, but yes, we're very close to Third World War, very close to a kind of a big or a huge celebrity in the region, but no one can talk what kind of occasion that's be. It's fight between Daesh, the others. There will be a kind of coalition between France and Russia and United States and the others against Daesh, or what happened on the ground will defeated all these thoughts. Today, for example, this airstrike in the north of Syria and shut down the Russian airstrike, I think will change the matter. Now maybe we can talk about another kind of a war between Turkey and Russia and another expectation. So I don't believe in that, but there is a kind of extreme thought about this in the region, yes.
It's interesting, Sarmad al-Ta'i used the word Armageddon. I think he was joking about Armageddon, but many do believe what's happening in Syria and Iraq is the prelude to the actual Armageddon.
Yes.
To the actual, I know this sounds crazy, but a lot of the fighters, and here I'm talking about the Shia side particularly, it's not just ISIS who believe in this end of world scenario. They believe that we are approaching the end of the world because Syria, al-Sham, plays a very heavy significance in the messianic apocalyptic literature and scripture in Shia Islam. And you know, this can be instrumentalized and states and governments can exploit this, but at a rank and file level, a lot of the Shia fighters who are leaving Iraq and going to Syria, it's not just because they want to defend Iraq from jihadists. They honestly believe, they genuinely believe they are part of a, you know, prelude to the end of times, good versus evil battle. And it's actually in the mainstream as well. You have senior Shia clerics, including Sheikh Jalal al-Din al-Saghir, one of the leaders of ISKI, which is one of the most mainstream Shia political parties, who actually, in one of his lectures, draws a map of Syria and points at a laser and says, according to this hadith or narration from 1,000 years ago, this is where the Turks will enter Syria. And here is where a leader will die and it will cause, you know, weeks of endless bloodshed and chaos. So he links, and a lot of people do link these ancient scriptures with contemporary events.
Mm-hmm.